It's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Judge Kristin Sweeney. We're honored to have Juvenile Court Judge Kristin Sweeney here with us this evening. Judge Sweeney was elected to the bench in 2004. Last year, she was elected by her fellow judges to the role of administrative judge, which carries the responsibility for making decisions about how the court's operations are run. Probably sounds like more power than it feels like, right? Judge Sweeney founded the Juvenile Court's mental health docket, which she presides over, as well as the Family Drug Court docket. Over the last 8 years, Judge Sweeney has been an integral part of planning 3 different large child welfare professional symposiums to promote interdisciplinary understanding and cooperation regarding permanency for youth in the child welfare system. She's become a champion for youth being present and having a voice in their own cases, as well as in this interdisciplinary education. Judge Sweeney formerly worked in the Cuyahoga County Public Defender's Office, and she received her undergraduate degree from Miami University and her JD from the Case Western Reserve University School of Law. Welcome, Judge Sweeney.
Good evening. It is a pleasure for me to be here with you on what has been such a lovely week. I've been on the bench for 11 years now, and I've worked in the juvenile court since 1998, as Betsy just said, in the Public Defender's Office. The juvenile court is often heartbreaking, often fun, usually challenging and frustrating, and always fascinating. In 2013, the juvenile court heard almost 20,000 cases among 6 judges and approximately about 23 magistrates. And every single one of those cases has a case number. The easiest and most accurate way of tracking what happens in juvenile court is through the case number. And if you don't want your heart broken, or you want to make sure you can sleep well every night, you will just focus on that case number and the hard, dry facts of the cases in court. You will not get to know the names and the faces and the stories of the kids behind those case numbers. Tonight, I want to talk to you about a specific area of juvenile court practice: abuse, neglect, and dependency cases. These are cases where the Cuyahoga County Department of Children and Family Services, I shorten that to CFS, or the agency, has filed a complaint against a parent or a legal custodian because the child is in danger of harm or has been harmed. By involving the court, the agency can force the parents to work a case plan or remove a child from their care or custody because of the harm. And in the most extreme cases, the agency can seek to have the child freed for adoption by severing the biological parent's rights so that the adoption can then take place in probate court. Every single one of these cases is heartbreaking. Over the years, when I first started in the juvenile court, things were very different for both children and family services and the court system, the juvenile court system itself. According to a Plain Dealer article, at the end of 2001, about 14 years ago, there were 6,200 kids in this county in foster care. On November 2nd, this past Monday, there were 1,766 kids in foster care. Think about the difference in those numbers for a minute. That's 4,434 fewer kids in care now than there were 14 years ago. Now, it's true that the population has dropped, but it hasn't dropped that much. Too many children in the 90s and the early part of the turn of the century were removed because Children and Family Services was constantly criticized by the media and certain people in the commissioner's office for a few terrible cases where children were harmed while the agency was involved. So the agency developed a mentality of, excuse me, but cover your ass. And if there was any risk at all, a child was removed. And frankly, the juvenile court made the situation worse by the way it processed its cases, or in some cases, didn't process the cases. Both systems were a mess, and there was no collaboration between Children and Family Services and the court. No child in the foster care system ever came to court. Then they were getting lost in the system. Their legal representation was practically non-existent. A kid in foster care at that time was literally a case number. I want to tell you two stories from when I was representing parents in these cases. This was before I was on the bench. I would represent the parents themselves. I remember in one case a social worker whispering to me in the hallway that she had secretly arranged one last visit for an 11-year-old boy between his mother and himself after permanent custody had been granted. She was speaking in such a low voice because she was afraid the visit would get her in trouble. And then his foster parents disrupted the placement, and he was without anybody. In those days, permanent custody meant a complete and permanent severing of the biological family forever. Siblings, aunts, relatives, it was done. And I can remember being told in another case by all the professionals where we had reached an agreement so that the aunt could adopt a child, that child's aunt had better go through her house and strip anything that might suggest that she was gay, because that would put the adoption in jeopardy. I am so proud and relieved to say that things have changed. We now have a fraction of kids in foster care that we did 14 years ago. Stories of bureaucratic incompetence that used to be commonplace are now rare. And I am most personally proud of the fact that we have pried open and continue to pry open the doors of the juvenile court to foster children so that they have a face and a voice in their own court case. The representation of children in court is much, much better. We are bringing CASA to Cuyahoga County. Thank you very much. That has been a long time coming. We are working on helping children who can't go home and haven't been adopted on better ways of aging out. Children and Family Services in the court now routinely meets on how to improve care for kids who are involved in both foster care and delinquency cases, and we are much better at working with service providers. How did things get so much better? I am going to explicitly underline here that I can only tell the court story. Children and Family Services has made some tremendous progress, and they deserve all the credit in the world for that, but that's their story. It's not my story. One of the main instigators for change in this particular county was the series of permanency symposiums that Betsy just mentioned that were held over a period of years, and that what she didn't say that were, in my opinion, created and facilitated in large part, or almost exclusively, because of Adoption Network Cleveland. Until that time, I am not aware of that many different people from that many different agencies coming together to listen to each other over a sustained period of time. And then there are the Get Real groups, where I spend a couple of evenings listening to boys and girls in foster care, sharing their stories and answering questions. A month ago, I was on Capitol Hill with the Angels in Adoption program, and the leaders of that organization were preparing us for what was called the Hill Day, where we were supposed to meet with our congresspeople and their members of staff to advocate for adoption legislation and reforms. And you know, it seemed kind of daunting meeting with a congressperson. I wasn't sure what I was going to say. But they kept saying, you just need to tell your story. What brought you to this place? Congresspeople are people too. I was scribbling notes at 11 p.m. on Monday night for this presentation, and I realized that the changes that have occurred in juvenile court have occurred because foster kids have come in and told us their stories and what it's like to be impacted by the court during this process. And that hearing those stories is what caused a lot of change. There was a lot of resistance in the court to bringing foster kids into their hearings. People were resistant because they know that sometimes the truth is painful. Honestly, it's easier when it's just a case number. It's like, when my sister's a doctor, and when she was in medical school, I would look at the books, you know, and when they're operating on a patient, you drape the body, right? You just have this little field, right? And you just see that area where you're cutting. So you don't notice that it's a human being that you're cutting into. It's a similar process in the court system. You know, it's easier when you just focus on the facts. But the stories hurt, but that's what causes the change. And if confronting that reality makes us angry enough to change the system, then so be it. That's what it takes. If getting angry is what takes us to make changes, then that's so be it. And I would say to you, don't be afraid to tell your stories, to state your truth, because that is how change comes to our system. The Cuyahoga County government, I don't know if this is widely known, the government, our county government, submitted a friend of court brief to the U.S. Supreme Court in the Obergefell case before this spring, which established the right of people to marry the people they love. And that brief consisted almost entirely of stories about how people had been impacted by their inability to get married. Stories matter. I want to talk about the role of Adoption Network Cleveland in this process because it's not intuitive, but it's very important. At a lunch for judges once, a judge who had been on the bench for several years, stood up and said that the judiciary was the most monastic of professions, meaning that the ethics rules regarding impartiality and the appearance of impropriety prevent judges from talking to people. The rules almost make you afraid to talk to people because you don't want to give the wrong impression, you don't want to suggest that you have a biased opinion, and so it's isolating. However, it is extremely common for people to come up to me in custody and ask me for advice about their daughter's custody case. I can't answer those questions. And I've had more than one person, believe it or not, come up to me in public, ask me if I was Judge Sweeney, and when I said yes, they said, "You sent my son to prison." Talk about an awkward conversation starter. Those kinds of experiences make it hard to go out sometimes in public and talk to people. And that is why Adoption Network Cleveland is vital, because it creates a structure in which judges and court people can safely talk to people that they might otherwise not have access to. And that is really, really important. Because of Angels in Adoption, I got access to a member of Congress that I would not have if I had just walked into their office on the street. Because of Adoption Network Cleveland, I can talk to foster kids and foster families in a way that I otherwise would not be able to do. And as I was thinking about this speech, I realized that one aspect of collaboration involving the courts that I've never heard acknowledged is the creation of that safe space that allows us to share stories. If the stories are the match that starts the fire, Adoption Network Cleveland is the wood that keeps that fire going and provides structure for the fire. I'm glad you like that, because I really didn't know how that would You can see a lot of the results of our collaboration and the changes in our system in a lot of ways. A press release just went out today and is on cleveland.com right now, asking for volunteers, for people to consider becoming a CASA volunteer to work with neglected and abused children. When I was in Washington, D.C., I met a member of your board, Lisa Busher, who was right there. And she was telling me about coming to court with her mentee who was struggling with aging out of the system. And, you know, I have to tell you, I was thrilled. Not because your mentor is struggling, but because 15 years ago, I never would have had a conversation like that. Because kids just did not come to court, and they did not age out of the system well. And I am so excited now when I go to these Get Real groups that kids are actually complaining about their guardian ad litems by name and sharing war stories about coming to court, because that's a big deal. Do we have progress to make at court? Yes, we do. Are things perfect? Not by a long shot. We need to move cases faster. We need to bring kids into court at a younger age. There is still a lot of misunderstanding between children and family services and the court because our systems are so very different. And we need to prevent so many youth from bouncing back and forth between the foster care and the delinquency system. That is probably the single biggest tragedy that we've got going right now in juvenile court and children and family services. We have a lot of work to do, but we are working. It is an exciting time to be in juvenile justice. And I'm proud to be a cheerleader for Adoption Network Cleveland, because this is a fabulous organization. I'm looking forward to our future endeavors, and I want to thank you for your time and attention. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.